You talking to me? You're talking to me?
I actually am talking to you and our listeners because we're here talking Robert De Niro and his new movie, The Alto Knights. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from Los Angeles. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we will cover a filmmaker who shaped our love of movies. Join us as we explore why they matter and review the three movies in the filmography that made the biggest impact on us. So you said it, Alex. This is a big one. De
It
Niro.
is another big one. Yeah, De Niro, I think one of the most famous and respected actors, and at least in Hollywood over the last 50 years, who is also still with us and making films. Like we'll talk about one of his newer ones today. I have definitely a lot of thoughts on him as an actor, my impressions of him, and what I think of him now. But why don't you kick this off? And what are your kind of De Niro hot takes or cold takes or just takes? What do you think of Bob De Niro?
I mean, we do this often, right, with some of these legends that I can't remember a time when I have not known of Robert De Niro because he's been so omnipresent in our culture and our movie going culture, and even growing millions of miles away in India. I knew who Robert De Niro was. And I knew that this was somebody who was synonymous with great acting. And then, of course, as I grew older and went back and watched a whole bunch of his stuff, I think he's of that signature generation of actors, right? So Pacino, him, Meryl, like this is the group of people who are bringing in sort of this very realistic, lived in kind of acting, almost sort of taking the baton from Brando and all of those guys and their, method acting time frame that they were coming in from, but sort of making it even deeper. But also the kind of roles he in particular took were all very sort of gray roles, right? And these are people who are struggling. They might be evil or negative or have really gray shades. And, people weren't used to seeing their heroes be this way, but yet empathize, with them because of their portrayal and kind of seeking that truth, seeking the truth in the detail of the performance. I mean, there are all these amazing quotes by other people who've worked with De Niro, and they talk about De Niro obsessing about what jacket to wear, even though all the jackets look the same, or
Right, right.
how low or high should the buttons be tied, because it says a lot about the person he's trying to portray. So I think he's sort of in that signature class of actors. Obviously, as time has gone by, whether it's for paying the bills or supporting his, I don't know how many children he has, God bless him.
Yeah.
Some weird choices have been made. That said, though, I don't know. There's a part of me that feels like, yeah, it would have been nice to always know De Niro as that stalwart of acting, and I hope all of his movies were amazing, all of his performances were incredible. But the fact is, that's not the case, and I'm okay with that because I feel like what he's achieved in his prime, and then when he does show up, as he has even in the last few years, what he can do, nobody else or very few people can achieve. And to me, that still kind of puts him in that Mount Rushmore of actors. He always will be, no matter what. And then, of course, his amazing collaborations with, directors, particularly Scorsese. Like, you can't separate Scorsese from him. I mean, it's an interesting thought exercise. If they had not found each other, what would that career arc look like? And
Right.
I'm of the opinion that De Niro would have been fine nonetheless. And I think Scorsese needed him more. And at least that's what I think of today. I might change my mind later. But yeah, he's an American and international movie legend. Always will be. How about you?
Yeah, yeah, I think obviously, yes, he's a legend and some of the best performances committed to film, and we'll talk about a couple today from both of our lists. But it's interesting for me to think about De Niro because he, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the movies that I watched were obviously like either kids' movies or more like, big budget sci-fi, Spielberg, Lucas, like Cameron, like those were my guys, those are my movies. And De Niro wasn't in any of those. And he
Mm,
was in more adult dramas, serious pictures, these famous old, even old Hollywood movies like The Godfather. I didn't see that until I was close to college, or, Raging Bull or Goodfellas. Like those were not movies I watched when I was like 12. So De
No.
Niro was always an actor that was for adults doing serious work. And I didn't really have a very intimate experience with him and his films until I was more like in high school and definitely like in college. So it's interesting. I know a lot of times in this podcast we talk about, your obsession with movies, especially Hollywood, sort of came a little later to you. So you were more adult when
Hmm.
you engaged with a lot of the films
Right.
we're talking about. And for me, the De Niro films are more akin to that. Like it was more I was late high school or in my 20s when I was actually watching his movies. I didn't watch them a lot as a kid. So I always did have this feeling of, oh, this is the greatest actor ever because the adults said that. He's in all these movies that I knew were famous and good, but it's not like I saw Raging Bull. I just knew that was supposed to be a quote unquote good movie with a great actor in it. So that was always the impression I had of him. And then when I started getting into his films, he definitely lived up to that. And
Mm.
we'll talk about like my first major impression of him and then, my masterpiece and these other films that I would see, as I was getting more into film and more into his movies. But I think also like then around that time is when his career took, in my view, like a major
Mm.
dip, and the quality of his both performances and the films he was doing was
Right.
just very quickly subpar. And rarely did he ever climb out of that, I think. And I was really trying to think about why that was. And I don't know, maybe this is incorrect or not, but he is a famous method actor, right? So he has to put a lot of time and energy into his performances and learning about the different types of roles he's playing, the types of people that he's playing, really getting to know them, and then that's what he then extracts into his performances. That sounds like a very arduous process that takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And maybe at some point he just is like got lazy and was like, I don't really feel like I need to do this anymore. So then his performances started feeling, honestly, to me, very lazy and not very good in bad movies. Like sometimes you can be a great actor in a bad movie, and you
Right.
can tell the actor is really trying, even though the movie's not good. I think Nicolas Cage, an actor who we talked about in a previous
Right.
episode, to me, he's that. Even though the movie's terrible, you can tell Nick Cage is committing everything he can to make sure he delivers a performance, at least to him, is good. And I don't really get that with late stage De Niro. Rarely. I think you bring up Marty Scorsese. I think the last two performances since
Yeah.
the last 25 years that I think really are that great, like the old De Niro comes through, is in The Irishman and in Killers of the Flower Moon. Something about reteaming back with Marty just sort of ignited in De Niro, like, I guess, a desire to deliver performances that, at least for me, I'm like, wow, he is actually trying and he's really good. Oh, I forgot he can act, actually. Because
Right.
it was so long, he just sort of felt like kind of like lost in the wilderness. And I don't really know why that is. But much like you said, though, I think no matter what happens to the end of his career and the other movies that he delivers, including the one that we're about to talk about, isn't going to sully his legacy of he was in Raging Bull, he was in Godfather, he was putting these performances on film for so long that were just iconic and something I don't think any other actor could have delivered to what he was delivering. So I still think he's incredible, but I don't think he's delivered a very noteworthy performance beyond the two Martin Scorsese films in about 25 years. Just
Yeah.
interesting that he took such a dip.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it is because method acting it just takes too much out of him. I don't know. It's he's he's still a legend. I still love him and just I don't know. I just wish he would be doing more putting more effort in nowadays, but who
Yeah,
knows.
I think that's part of it, maybe. I also think that he comes from this generation of stories that were being told that are just not being told anymore, right? So I think there are very fewer topics, that are told at that scale with that kind of writing, right kind of budget behind it, that sort of demand, that kind of work. So I think there's a little bit of that.
Mm,
Um, I'm sure there's some, pay the bills, phone in kind of lazy stuff as well, which kind of comes in, which, I don't blame people for that. But yeah, as audience members, especially for an actor of that mantle, it's disappointing for sure when that happens. But I think it has to do with just the kind of movies that are made and also who's making them. Because I feel like this is somebody who really has this sort of symbiotic relationship with their director. Like all of his great performances have this, all the departments are working in concert, like you were saying, right? Like there are few
mhm,
actors who are great even in bad movies. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe De Niro needs that kind of commitment from the material, the
mm,
director, the cast, how it's mounted for him to kind of really care and show up. So who knows? But I think a lot of it just has to do with grown-up serious movies with these sort of gray characters. They don't exist. And I think it has to say a little bit about just the times we live in financially, business-wise, but also morally, right? Like we have a problem now with the gray. You are bad or you are great. Like the people in between, like we don't want to talk about nuance. It's true in pretty much every aspect of our living. So I think there's something to do with that too.
No, no, I think that's a good point. The material just is not there. And maybe then when it is, when like Marty's making movies, who does still tackle these
Right.
more
He
classic
shows up.
tales. Right. And so then he still can deliver great performances. So yeah, maybe the material just left him behind in a way. That being said, again, maybe I'm being too hard on him and that when you're coming from such highs, it
There's
can
also
at
that.
some point it's gonna go down. Right.
Right.
It just naturally is. And he has some of the highest highs of any
Totally. And
actor. So
you'll always be in comparison to Raging Bull, Taxi Driver,
right.
King of Comedy, all the movies, right? So you're almost like at a disadvantage because you have to live up to
That's
the
true.
performances you clocked in yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe again, I should not be the bar to judge De Niro on to be past De Niro performances. It should more
Yeah.
be like, does he work within the movie, and is he still making me compelled to be interested in the characters and make the characters feel real and true to life, which I think was what a lot of these performances were mentioning. I think he can really do that. Like there is a
Mhm.
truth in these characters, even if they are not very well sketched out or more meant to represent archetypes and not be fleshed out. He brings some sort of level of realism to it. But yeah, he's he is one of the greats. So this is going to be a fun discussion as we go down the Robert De Niro lane here.
Yep. So with that, do you want to talk about our latest De Niro offering, the Alto Knights?
Sure. So this movie just came out a couple weeks back. It's called The Alto
And
Knights.
went.
That's right. That's right.
I'm sorry.
And the IMDb plot summary: two of New York's most notorious organized crime bosses vie for control of the city streets. Once best friends, petty jealousies, and a series of betrayals set them on a deadly collision course. So this movie is directed by Barry Levinson, written by Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote The Goodfellas, and starring Robert De Niro. And Robert De Niro, he plays two different characters in this movie, along with Deborah Messing and Catherine Narducci. So I'll start with my thoughts on De Niro in this. I think I was intrigued by him choosing to play two completely separate characters. These are not brothers, these are not twins, these are just two different mobsters that came into power around the same time. So it's a typical like New York mob film. And I thought, okay, there's got to be something interesting to this, why he's doing this. Maybe it's he's intrigued by the duality of the two characters, or there'll be some artistic reason for the same actor to play both roles. And honestly, I couldn't see anything in that, like why he did this. And it was honestly, for me, distracting because every time I would see him in either role, I'd be thinking about that. I'm like, okay, why is De
Mm.
Niro him and this also this other his best friend and rival? And that I guess I'll just call it like the gimmick or the decision for De Niro to play the same characters. I was just searching the whole film for like what was the point of this? And because it wasn't really obvious enough to me, I just felt that his performances just seemed yeah, kind of. I guess I'll use the word lazy, which I might be using a lot as describing this movie, at least with him. I was like, okay, what's the point? Now, transformation, yes, I could tell these two characters looked different from each other. There was definitely a different attitude, so I could tell, I could close my eyes and when each of them were talking, which I did a couple times, to be like, can I tell the difference between the two? And yeah, there is a subtle enough difference where he is doing two performances here, but yeah, I couldn't really find the purpose in it, and then therefore just did not compel me enough to be interested in this. And the movie I did think was very poor, and we'll talk more about the film in a second. It's maybe there was more of a problem with the movie, but yeah, what was your thoughts on Alto Nights? And again, I'm curious too on did you think there was a reason behind why he did this, and did it work for you?
Yeah, we'll talk more about the movie. I think the movie is to be blamed a little bit for that sort of not coming across. But I think the way I thought about it, not that the movie did a good job kind of showing this, which is that these are two people who come from the same place. And even though neither of them is quote unquote the good guy, but the attitudes and approaches towards life and the people who are in their orbit are very different.
Hmm.
One is brutal and is selfish and sort of a loudmouth kind of guy versus the other, even though he's a crook as well, he does have love in his life and takes care of Deborah Messing and other people and has like a different attitude, right? So I think that's sort of what they're trying to show, that it's the same person essentially with this duality, and because they come from the same cloth. But I think it's more a failing of the movie that doesn't really land on you the way it should, right? In a powerful way, especially with an amazing actor like De Niro. Now, as far as his performance goes, yeah, I like the one who's sort of the quote unquote badder version
Yeah, yeah.
one, because I
Uh-huh.
think, I mean, the cynical read would be that this is a Joe Pesci impression, but I thought there was more there. I think he's, you know, committing to that performance, like his whole physicality, not just the makeup and prosthetics, but just the way he carries himself, the way he moves. All of it is pretty transformed, and I think that felt great. To me, which again maybe is a failing of the movie, is that the other De Niro character, there isn't much done there. It sort of feels like it's just Robert De Niro,
Yeah. Yeah.
not a performance, but just Robert De Niro being a narrator, which I also, again, spoiler alert, getting into the movies, like, why is there a narrator
Yeah,
to
yeah,
begin
yeah.
with?
Yeah.
So if I, for a minute, just remove the narrator part, away, then actually it becomes a more interesting movie in my opinion, but also the performances and the differences between the two De Niros will probably also shine. Or they could have had like a third person, a
Three
third
De
De Niro.
Niros?
Yes. Or somebody else do the narration if you so want that. So yeah, so I wouldn't put this in the best of the best, obviously, but I also wouldn't put De Niro's performance in, the garbage sort of category either. Like I think it was fine to good. And there were definitely some moments of sadness and some moments of regret, and even some moments of sort of blatant, brutal argument and anger. Like how petty the bad one is when they're driving up to that big meeting and sort of just bullying all the people in the car and what have you. Like, I kind of got a kick out of that, and that's what De Niro can do, even if the movie around him is sort of slow and languid, like he can sort of engage your interest. So I think he definitely did that.
Yeah, that character I thought was more interesting. And to your
Yeah.
point around the other De Niro, I'll call him nicer, but I guess he was nicer, even though again they're both
Yeah.
both
Yeah.
mobsters. Yeah, that performance just seemed like we've seen it so many different times from him. Like, okay, De Niro's playing a mob boss. Like, this is not anything new, and I don't think he brought anything interesting to that side of the performance. And yeah, like it just again felt like what's the point of this? Though in the other role, the more energetic one, those scenes at least when he was playing that character, especially when the two of them were on screen together, I thought it was had a little more energy to it. But
Yeah.
the
The
movie
dinner scene is
definitely,
very good, I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The movie definitely just had a lot of other issues that I don't think Robert De Niro could have saved or made that
No.
transcended the other issues with the entire film in and of itself, which again I did not think it was very good. So yeah, is this an embarrassment for him? No. I think maybe it's he could tick a box and say, well, I played two characters in the same movie like Eddie Murphy style, and maybe that's something he's always wanted to do. Okay, you tick that box off. This is your version of the clumps. Cool. But you know, was there a point to that? I guess you're right. I'm like, are they supposed to be like, yeah, two sides of the same coin? But then
Right.
the movie should have made that point on its
They
own
don't do
without
that.
the fact that it's two actors shouldn't be the reason why we're making that connection. It should be something to do with the narrative. So if that was their intent, I think the movie failed De Niro if that's what he wanted
I
to do.
agree.
Or maybe he got paid twice. I don't know. He gets two paychecks for leading man. Maybe that's what it was. I don't really know how the economics of a movie where you're in more than one role, whether
I
you get
hope
paid
so.
for more than one part. I hope so too.
He has like a 6-month-old or 1-year-old child or something, like a baby child.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
Maybe
he
that's
needs.
what it is. He needs, yeah. When his
That's it.
next kid, then he'll play three roles in it. So, we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit, but
Yeah.
film, it sounds like neither of us are really that impressed. So what were your overall thoughts on the Alto Knights as just as a movie?
Yeah, I mean, I went in with like expecting absolutely nothing, right? Because the reviews and everything on this were out pretty early and nobody sort of liked it. And I even question why does this movie exist? Just like reading the log line, right? Like, why are we
Yeah.
making this movie? And we just done The Irishman, which is kind of this meditation of a mobster, in his later life. So we sort of done that. That said, though, yeah, the movie does not work. But maybe because I was coming at it with such low expectations, even though I felt myself kind of checking out and being a little bit fidgety and what have you in the beginning, as the movie went on, I did kind of get engaged with it, you know?
Mm.
And this is not to say the movie is good. I think there's something about their performances and something about I think I give a lot of credit to the cinematographer who I'm forgetting his name, but he's definitely a reputed cinematographer. But the movie looks very good. The
Hmm.
production design, the way it's lit up. And there's something about the languid quality which was sort of boring me in the beginning. Once I sort of just embraced it, I don't know, it was sort of meditative in a way to kind of live with these people and in their world of them sparring with each other even though they've all done bad things. There's a bit of a reminiscence of childhood and what life could have been, and there's actually a lot of love between the two, but they have a hard time expressing that. And then the cost and the damage that's happened to all the other people around them, and then sort of this comedic extravaganza of all these mobsters coming together from all over the country. That I've not seen that done in that way. And I
Hmm.
found that actually quite intriguing. All these people come in there and then the quote unquote nicer De Niro having this mega plan to sort of, get away and do a number on them. Like, I think all that was relatively interesting to me. I just wish that the first person narrative was not there and the movie just had just a little bit more propulsion and sort of oomph to it. I think if those elements were in place, this movie would have been actually much better. Having said that, it's still the question of like why this exists. You can't escape that. And I think it takes a lot of effort to kind of get past that question. So even without those elements, I don't know if this movie would be like a, 4-star movie. It wouldn't be, but it would be better. I think a lot better. But overall, like, I don't know, maybe I went with such low expectations. I actually was okay on it. I didn't hate it entirely. I didn't want to run away from the theater. So I'll say that. What about
Y
you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was definitely pretty bad for a lot of the reasons that you said too, and the main one just being like, yeah, nothing really happened enough where the story was sort of stuck. Except so it starts with an assassination attempt on the nice De
Right.
Niro. So like all of a sudden something big is happening. I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But then the movie is, non-linear with this narrator. And I always felt like, oh, they just put the most interesting thing in the first 5 minutes because the rest of this movie is just like men talking in rooms, and I'm not engaged, nor do I really kind of know what's going on. It's like it actually reminded me of The Irishman in a way where in that film there are all these they bring in some mobster guy, and then the movie would show as a subtitle like this is the person's name, this is when they
Right.
died, this is who they are. And I got sort of the point in that movie. It was talking about death and all these people, it's a life they're gonna die at some point, so there was a narrative reason for that in terms of the theme, but it also helped me sort of follow what was going on. It's like, okay, well, this is the head of the Jersey family. In this movie, it was like, okay, De Niro's talking to this one guy. I'm like, wait, who is this guy?
I know.
Like, how am I supposed to know? Like, it just so it made the stakes kind of go away because I didn't know who any of
Right.
these people were really.
And it makes you check out because you don't even know who these
Exactly.
people are. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And also it was a mobs movie, and these are two, notorious mobsters, real life guys. But because they didn't really show any mob things that they did, like there wasn't like a scene in Godfather where people come to him and like, "Oh, you must do this favor for me," or
Mm,
like in Goodfellas when they're actually killing people on screen. These guys, you really see, oh, these are dangerous guys who are bad, and maybe this is too realistic, and the mob bosses never get their hands dirty in real life, and this was a true story, so maybe the movie's trying to be very truthful in the fact that yeah, these aren't hitmen or guys who committed any murders directly, they're more like the people at the top. But because of that, then I'm like, why are these guys even that dangerous, or why are they that big of a deal?
mm,
I just was completely unengaged for
hmm.
most of the film for that. So that was a question of like, why do we need this story to be told? There's been
Yeah.
so many mob movies over the last 100 years almost now. There's some of them have broken new ground, some of them have not with cliches, but at least they're entertaining.
Right.
And this movie, I'm like, what is the point of all of this? Even though I will give it some credit on, like you said, production design, great, very transportive, looks expensive in a good way. Everything sort of around the story actually looked great, and I think you could tell these people put a lot of care into making the film. But yeah, the question still remained of like, what was the
Why do it?
why am
Yeah.
I watching this? You know, it's 2 hours, but it felt like three because I'm like, is there anything interesting going to happen in this thing at all? Like, come on. Though it was funny that I saw it on maybe it was opening night or the day after it came out, and the theater was like 25% full, and other people were like really digging it, like
Huh.
laughing at the movie, very engaged. I'm like, is this just me? And like some parts of the comedy I think only work because other people in the movie were like laughing at it. I'm like, you thought that was funny? Like, I guess maybe it's just
I
me.
laughed at some bits, especially in the
Okay.
third, act, if you will. Yeah.
But so yeah, maybe oh yeah, I guess all the mobs just kind of running away at the end. And I like the scene with
That's kind of fun.
the
Yeah.
dogs with the mink
Dog scene is
coats.
fun. Yeah.
That was cool. But yeah, just like I don't know why. Maybe this is a passion project for, Barry Levinson, who has delivered some great movies over the years for sure, some major classics, and I love The Natural and like Wag the Dog and stuff. But yeah,
Hmm.
like why did this have to yeah. Why was this made? Why was De Niro playing two roles? These are questions that a movie needs to answer, or else it just is not engaging. So yeah, is it the worst movie I've ever seen? No. Is it embarrassing to Barry Levinson and Robert De Niro's legacy? No, it's not. But I wouldn't
Definitely.
recommend anyone necessarily see
Yeah.
this. And I don't think this would even be like a footnote in De Niro's like career summary about oh the time that he played two roles in a movie.
It'll
Like
vanish, as it came, and which is so sad, right? Because all these people are involved in it, and a movie like this should count for more, but
yeah,
it doesn't because of that why question. And then just, I think the biggest failure, if you can get past the why question, is a screenplay.
yeah,
It
yeah,
just, at the screenplay level, it just fails. And then on top of that, from a direction standpoint, there's just no flair or excitement to it. And I think, I don't know, maybe we're just spoiled now with Scorsese mob movies that they all have so much like style and
yeah.
energy and propulsion to it. So we automatically expect that those set pieces or, fun camera angles from, back of the restaurant. And
Mm-hmm.
you get none of that, which, I'm not saying all movies need to have those things, but something, right? A point of view, and especially when a screenplay is not really clicking, that is in the hands of the direction and the performances, right?
Yeah.
And like we said, the other departments are bringing it, so I guess that credit goes to them and the director. But yeah, it just doesn't. It just stays there.
Yeah.
Uh, that said, like I said, I did enjoy the final act. I mean, enjoy is a very strong word, but at least I chuckled and I found that kind of interesting a little bit. But yeah, I would not recommend it. I would never watch it again.
Yeah. Well, Alto Knights. That's a great way to start off our De Niro episode to get into that. So why don't we move from his new film to our top three? So for new viewers of the show, what we do in each episode is we have a creative, in this example, Robert De Niro in this episode, and we're gonna go over our top three. So this is first we're starting with The First Love, and this is the movie that made the first impression on us personally, and of like, wow, we love Robert De Niro. And then the second movie we'll go over is our masterpiece, the movie that really resonates with us the most that De Niro has been in. And then finally, a wild card. This is just another De Niro movie that is important to us in some way. Maybe he took a big swing on something interesting that worked or didn't work. Maybe it's a movie that a lot of people thinks are bad or the performance is bad, but we personally, for some reason, like. So that'll be the wild card choice. So why don't we kick off then our top threes with our first love? So Karan, why don't you go first on your first love of Bobby De Niro? What do you got for us?
Sounds good. So my first love is Cape Fear from 1991, directed by Scorsese, right off the bat. Nero, Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, and Juliette Lewis. So I feel like I watched this movie way before I probably should have watched this movie, and I was trying to remember how and when, and I think it was me as a teenager at somebody else's home who had probably older kids, and because they would put all the kids in, so and so's bedroom or whatever, watch a movie so you don't trouble us, and that's how I remember watching some scenes. And I don't remember the plot. Although there is not much plot anyway. But what I remembered from that moment till this date was De Niro's menacing smile and all his tattoos. I don't think I'd seen anybody who looked like that in the movies at that age. I mean, how could I have? And let alone in real life, you know?
Right.
And I don't know, it made an impression on me. And even though I didn't remember much about the movie or the performance and such, it had this kind of visceral impression on me that this person is dangerous, but also kind of seductive, if that's the word. Like you couldn't look away. It's like a car crash that you can't look away from. So that's why I had to put this as my kind of first love because it's my first impression. And even though I don't know remember much about it, it made a deep impression on me. Now, obviously, I've since then watched the movie maybe one more time before preparing for this podcast, and we'll talk about the movie separately. But yeah, all those things are still very true. I mean, he is really scary. It's a very committed performance from the get-go. The smile, the way he talks, the moves, the way he looks like he's so ripped in this movie. I don't think he's looked this way in any other movie that I've seen off of his. So yeah, it's a very chilling, sort of dangerous performance. I will say on this rewatch, and maybe this is to do more with the movie, is that his performance, though very committed and intense, it does feel kind of one note to me, which is not something that I would say about a De Niro performance, especially in a Scorsese movie. And I think it has a lot to do with this movie and the way this was constructed and prepared. I'm sure you know more about the backstory of the movie because it doesn't feel like a Scorsese movie to me the way Scorsese movies typically do. But for De Niro, normally, even when he's playing like a really bad guy or a negative character, there's always something else in layers. And I'm not even saying like backstory or plot, no, but just like his being has sort of layers to it, which this character just doesn't. And at some point, I guess all you see is the intensity just like ratcheting up. And at some point, that gets a bit exhausting, you know? I mean, he's made other movies which were way more brutal, but they keep your attention. The performance keeps your attention because there's a lot more, to them and to that person that he's playing. And so that's sort of what I felt about, watching this movie this time and his performance. But yeah, what did you think of De Niro and Cape Fear? And had you watched this movie before?
Yeah, I'd seen it before, and interestingly, it was kind of the opposite of it sounds like the story you're describing, where you were at somebody else's house and it was someone older than you that had like a VHS. Mine was also a VHS, but it was in my house, and I'm almost positive it was actually my younger sisters that like rented this movie, and that is how I actually first had seen it.
Yikes.
So I was, an older high school student, and I'll get to the first movie that really left an impression on me with De Niro, but it was after that. So I'd seen him in a movie before, but
Uh,
not anything like this. And I already had an impression of him actually from just being a kid and learning about what the types of roles that he would
right.
normally do, specifically Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, and even Godfather 2, where De Niro has always been sort of a dangerous guy to me. I associate him with violence, sudden acts of it, like he'll kill you at any second. And that I always had that impression of him even as a young child. So this movie sort of reinforced that of like he is a very
Mm,
dangerous guy that, is in normal society, even though he's a criminal. But he's around this family, walking around free, but commits these incredibly grisly murders and is going after this family and things like that. And for me, it's like, yeah, this is of course what De Niro would do. And that transformation you mentioned too, of like his body and all the tattoos and the accent, and that is also something as a young kid, you think actors just transform themselves all the time, and especially De Niro. We'll talk about Raging Bull in a little bit. The physical transformation of Raging Bull that he was in, and that I just associate him with that too.
mm,
So in this movie, it's like, yeah, of course he looks different and has all these tattoos and is playing this kind of crazy guy that is incredibly dangerous. That is a very committed performance. Like this is not in
yeah,
any way a later lazy performance from De Niro. I
not
mean,
at
he is
all.
putting everything on the screen in a movie that is very heightened anyway, which again we'll get to in a second. But yeah, like I always found this performance actually kind of fun to watch, even though he's
Mm,
a terrible guy who does horrible things. This whole movie does have this element of fun in it to me that I think comes through in the directing and a lot of the choices Scorsese did, but also just in what De Niro is doing in this film. And it's just such a yeah, like unique thing for Marty and also for De Niro in terms of what they were doing in this film, which I should also say I've not seen the original
yeah,
movie,
me
which is
neither.
probably bad. I definitely should watch it. It's supposed to be amazing and very similar actually in tone to this in a way from what I've heard. So I can't compare to the original performances in the original film, but yeah, like I think this is a great performance from De Niro and in a movie that I find really fun and definitely something that I don't think he's played this type of, I guess I'll use the word kind of over the top villain in
Yeah.
a way that almost, yeah, feels very pulpy than an over the top in the sense of what he would do in, or not over the top, in a more exaggerated character like he would do in King of Comedy or Raging Bull or Taxi Driver or something, you know. But yeah, I think he's great in it actually. But yeah, we can.
Yeah.
When I move into the movie then too, it sounds like maybe you don't like this movie as much as I do. What are your Cape Fear thoughts?
Yeah, maybe I think that's where I'm sort of at, like just movie and the register in which the movies and the performances, and it's very blatant and heightened and pulpy, and I see that it just is something that I don't enjoy, especially in this genre where something so grisly is happening. I guess I'll have to be in a different mood to kind of withdraw fun out of it. And that it's a hard watch, even though they're trying to be very heightened. I think, I don't know if this is fair to say, but there's a bit of a Hitchcockian sort of quality to the movie
Oh,
as well, but not in a
absolutely.
good way.
Oh,
This movie
really?
reminds me of sort of the later Hitchcock movies like Frenzy, and which is the other one which is like really
Family
gruesome.
Plot. Oh, Frenzy's probably yeah, they have some pretty gruesome murders in that one. Yeah, in
Yeah,
Frenzy,
that one,
yeah.
which is kind of unwatchable, at least to me. I mean, maybe I need to revisit at some point, but it sort of reminded me of that, okay, we know this thing and this is heightened, we're going to beat this thing on you throughout the movie. So that's sort of how I felt about it. That said, though, I think what is interesting about the movie is that even though we had this really outwardly bad guy, none of the other people are also entirely blame free. I mean, except Juliette Lewis, who's obviously a kid, so
Right, right.
there's that. But yeah, Nick Nolte has a bunch of stuff that he's done, and he's not a clean good guy, if you will. And you don't really learn too much about Jessica Lange, but even there, so I think that's interesting. I think that there's sort of more going on. Otherwise, this movie would just be the hammer on the head throughout the movie. And then, of course, it's a Scorsese movie, right? So it looks great. Like you're really transported to the South and how everybody looks and the cars and the houses and all of that. So it has great cinematography, production design. The score is great, chilling, all of
Incredible.
that. But
Yeah.
yeah, incredible score. But yeah, this is just not my style. I don't know. I'm sort of prepared for programmed, I should say, for Scorsese to handle material that is dark, but with a lot of nuance and complexity. And this is just not it. So I don't know. I prefer that Scorsese.
And yeah, yeah, I've always liked this movie a lot, actually, and I think it's one of my favorite of Scorsese films because I do interpret this is his homage to Alfred Hitchcock in
Right.
many different ways. You know, I have Saul Bass doing the opening credits,
That I loved. Yeah.
which is amazing.
Yeah.
There's that whole incredible scene with when they're in the family home. It's a three of them, and then there's a big fireworks display happening. And
Right.
there's just all these really interesting, like vertigo like sort of colors that are happening. And again, I feel like this is him sort of like paying homage to Vertigo. And then, like we mentioned, the score too. This is the original score from this film, which was done by Bernard Herrmann, who's one
Right.
of Hitchcock's guys. Elmore Bernstein kind of adapted it, but it sounds like a 60s sort of
Totally does. Yeah.
thriller score, which in a way also to me makes this movie feel timeless kind of. If the score was more of a 90s score or something that doesn't feel so classic, the movie just wouldn't work enough for me. And I think too this marries, or at least I think Scorsese's trying to marry the um Hitchcock elements with his own elements. So Scorsese
Mm.
is, incredibly violent, bursts of violence in his movies, and Hitchcock was very violent too, but it's at least like before we get to films like Frenzy, it was like implied violence.
Yeah. You
And
never saw it.
you never really see it because he couldn't show it, right? Because of
Right.
the ratings. And what I love is the sequence when Robert De Niro's character attacks Ileana Douglas's character.
Right. It's,
It kind of
oh,
happens out of nowhere. It's chilling and vicious. And then there's like a Scorsese version of that scene, which is, or kind of take on it, where he literally bites her face and he spits out and it's like super graphic, and then it cuts to a wide shot of a window with shadows where there's violence. So it's like, okay, that's sort of like how Hitch would have done it because he
Hmm.
couldn't show what Marty did, and Marty would do it where no, he's showing like there's a rape, there's literally
Right.
like he's biting her face off. It's super grisly, and I just love the marriage of those two types of filmmaking styles. Even the ending sequence to me where they're on this houseboat and it's like raining, it feels very much like a
Yep.
Hitchcock big action scene at the end of, a thriller movie that he has. And I just think that also is because there's so much violence, you're really worried about the characters and who's going to die. And it feels more, yeah, like, something horrible could happen even more so than in a Hitch film when you always know the good guy's gonna make it out no matter what. So I don't know, like those things to me, that the marriage of those two styles and what how Marty was being like, I want to honor Hitch because he's one of my favorites, but sort of throw my own style into it is for me at least what really works. And just one other thing I love about the movie too is the sort of the 90s genre film or genre of sort of white suburban family being
Hmm.
attacked by some other that is like coming in. I don't know. There's got to be there's like Pacific Heights and
Right.
domestic disturbance and fear and all these movies that are about like something coming into the suburbs and attacking this like perfect white suburban family. And I don't know. I just like that genre. I think it's funny and I think you can obviously read a lot into sort of the politics of the 90s and where things are happening. I think this movie, because it is in that genre too, I just also find it enjoyable because I love when suburban families are terrorized by some outside force. And the dad, who's always kind of meek, has to then become not meek and like defend the family. And I don't know. I don't know why I like those films, but yeah, I think the movie to me just is a movie that feels like Scorsese, but almost like also at the same time not, but in a successful way. Unlike what Gus Van Sant did with the Psycho remake, where he basically just remade the
Right.
movie. It's like this is my homage to Hitchcock. Like that to me doesn't work. But this, I don't know.
Right.
I think this movie is really fun because of that heightened sense of what he's doing. But yeah, I've always enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think it's an intellectual exercise. I see all of those pieces, but as a pure movie watching experience, it just feels relentless to me, even though it's made very competently and all of that is intentional, but it's sort of more like, yeah, when you think about it, then it all shows up. Otherwise, you're watching what you're watching. That's sort of how I feel about it. Um, so yeah, I guess let's maybe move on to your first love.
Sure. So my first love is the Robert De Niro film Heat. This is from
The big
1995.
one.
This is a huge one. Yeah. This is IMDb plot summary. A group of high-end professional thieves start to feel the heat, get it, because of the title, from the LAPD when they unknowingly leave a verbal clue in their latest heist. So this is written and directed by Michael Mann, like one of the best filmmakers, one of my favorites, starring Robert De Niro and also Al Pacino in their first on-screen performance together, as well as Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore, Natalie Portman, John Voight. There's a lot of people in this film. So for me and why this is my first love. So this was the first film that I saw of De Niro's, and I again had this reputation of this guy being this film legend and things like that. And again, I associated him with mobsters because I knew about Goodfellas and Godfather and things. So in this movie, yeah, he's playing a criminal and a very serious, incredibly serious film. Definitely an adult drama, adult action movie. So all the things that I expected to find in a De Niro film, I did on my first outgoing. Yeah, it's like choosing one of the best movies of the 90s. So I was
Right.
lucky that I like stumbled into this instead of yeah, I don't know. I can't think of another bad De Niro movie from that time, but it could have been something else, right? So it's ticking all the boxes for me, and I was like, oh yeah, his reputation sort of preceded him in a sense when I saw this. And even though I had not seen a De Niro film at this time, I had seen some Al Pacino stuff and I knew about the historic meeting of these two actors. Like that was something I knew because I didn't see this in the theaters. I saw this maybe like a year
Mm.
after it came out on VHS. And that scene, even though I didn't live the gravitas of it, like having followed these two actors for 30 years and finally they're meeting for the first time on screen, I felt it still. Like somehow that this, it's history that you're watching it, even though, like, again, for me, it could have been just any other random movie. So yeah, like that's why this one to me was always be the first one where I'm like, okay, yeah, this is exactly what I would expect out of a De Niro movie, and the movie's fantastic too, which we'll get into a second. But what is your kind of first experience with Heat, and then how do you feel about De Niro in this film? And did he live up to your expectation like he did mine?
Oh yeah, for sure. I came to it much later in life, as you referenced earlier. So I knew about all the good baggage, quote unquote, with this movie. And it still lived up, and it's one of those movies, like all great movies, where the gift just keeps giving the more you watch it. But with De Niro specifically, we've known him to be this like really committed, deep actor, but playing like bad guys or, guys with negative shades and what have you. But I think there's something else going on with this movie in terms of its quiet intensity in his performance.
Hmm.
Because we've seen all the other aspects of commitment and Gray and such in other movies, especially the Scorsese masterpieces, but usually those movies are louder and he is louder in them, right? Like you're talking about me and you have all these sort of signature lines and what have
Yeah.
you. This is a very reserved, muted sort of guy who's ruthless, but I think at the same time has stuff that he's kind of abided by his whole life, right? Whatever mob life and gangster life that he's lived, like he's kind of abided by this credo and leads a very serious, disciplined life with no furniture in his home, nothing, right? And then he meets this woman, and suddenly things start to change. So I mean, this is my favorite kind of performance by anybody, but especially somebody like De Niro, where you can see the character thinking and their compass and the credo that they abided by crumbling. And it sort of feels so real time and urgent, right? Like this is not De Niro thinking, this is the character thinking, right? As in terms of what am I going to do? Am I going to go and take care of what's his name, Waingro, or go to New Zealand? Like
Right.
you see that on his face, and it's not over the top. It's a very reserved, serious performance. And on top of all of the ruthlessness and dread, you're still kind of attracted to him. You're still kind of almost rooting for him that, oh, maybe he'll make it through despite all the bad things he's done. So it's just such a masterclass in acting and just being screen presence, the way he carries himself. He looks great. Yeah, it's just a masterclass. And then of course we'll talk about the movie because people around him are also bringing their A game. So that just elevates him. And it's sort of that classic thing, right? Like acting is reacting, as they say. So
Right.
when De Niro is in this great ensemble, let alone his, compadre in Pacino, it's just electric.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the thing also that is so great about this performance, like you said, is it is very subtle, but you can tell what he's going through. And not only is the audience, I think, rooting for him to escape, but what I love about this movie is you get the sense that Al Pacino, in a way, also wants him to escape too. And they both respect each other so much that they want them to make the right choices and not kind of fall into this trap of course, it's a cop and robber movie. So the cops and robbers have to meet, and usually, it's American films, right? So the robbers always have to get caught and the cops win. And it's almost like they both know that in the movie. They're like, look, I know what's gonna happen. You're gonna catch me, you're the cop. But like what if you don't? And Pacino's almost like, yeah, if you don't make you can get away here. Like you can get away. You can make the right choice, which is to, I mean, he doesn't really know about Amy Brennan and the woman that he's kind of
Right.
falling for, but it's like the whole movie is sort of like rooting him to get away. And then in that amazing scene in the car when he kind of makes up his mind, almost on the spot, of like, you know what? No, I have to go and kill Waingro. And at that point he's like throwing away all of his chances
Yeah.
for happiness and for this love that he's developing with Amy Brenneman. Because yeah, it's almost the theme, like we talked about this in a previous film where we talked with Michael Mann. I think it was Miami Vice, where like all of his movies are about this time is luck, which comes from this. It's set in this movie. It's also repeated in Miami Vice, and you sort of take that for what he's like. That's why you always have to make sure you can escape, right? When the cops are coming, that might be
Hmm.
your time. You have to get away, and then it's almost like he's changes into, oh well, maybe that means I have to. The time that I can spend with Amy Brenneman is actually what I'm lucky that I have this opportunity. But
Right.
then he like throws it away and goes back to, no, 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 like I have to avenge, my crew and get Waingro, because at the end of the day, like I am a criminal who has to, avenge the death of one of my guys, and who ruined, in this guy also ruined the entire score. And it's like that sort of takes over, and that is what he realizes. You know what? time is luck, so I have to get this guy. Like that's what I want to
Yeah,
do instead. And I just love that scene in the car where you can
it's
tell that's what he's
amazing.
thinking. And it's Michael Mann, so like we mentioned in that Miami Vice too, it's all about what's not said and the
Right.
performances, and everything is sort of between the lines. And I think De Niro nails it with this character for sure, where you can tell exactly what he's thinking as the audience, like, no, don't just escape. You can get away, you can get away. But then at the same time, okay, I get it. You got to go there. And you love when he kills Waingro too. Like you want that to
Yeah.
happen too, but it's tragedy in that too.
It's tragic. I mean, you can feel his sadness, you can feel that I've come this close to having a different life, but he can't escape himself. What about the movie? I mean, what's not been said about Heat?
Yeah, I mean it's just a Hollywood American movie classic, bar
Yeah.
none. Michael Mann is one of my favorite directors. It's not my favorite film of his actually. I think The Insider for me personally, another film we covered, is my ultimate Michael Mann film. But this is number two. Like it honestly doesn't really get any better than this when you're talking about an adult crime drama. Like kind of like you were referencing too. It's not just Pacino and De Niro that are great in this. Like the entire cast is stacked with some of the best actors of that time, all like delivering top of their game performances. So the fact when you surround yourself as a good actor with an ensemble that is also that good, every performance then gets better, and then the movie gets better. And this movie definitely has that. I mean, what is your impression of Heat? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, people have dedicated hours and hours of podcasting and videos on Heat. So, I mean, to me, this is Michael Mann's best. This is my number one of his. And I've seen this movie like, I don't know, 5 times, but I feel like every time I watch it, I take something else from it. And so, the obviouses are all been said, right? Like great performance. Nobody has shot these chase sequences and gunfight sequences with such realism, the way the whole thing is mounted from cinematography to how realistic it all feels, but yet entertaining with the score, all of that. So much has been said about that already. Obviously, the two central performances and how these two characters in Pacino and De Niro are kind of foils to each other. There's the respect element that you talked about. They're almost sort of they understand each other in a deep way that nobody else can. I mean, that's the true love story of the movie, actually.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the end, spoiler alert, who's not watched the movie, when De Niro dies, the way Pacino holds him, there's so much love in that kind of embrace almost, and even sadness. So that's amazing. And then just the filmmaking, right? Like everybody knows, right, from watching this movie in the 90s and for decades to come, that their reunion is epic. But for man to sort of hold that moment to when it does happen and how that thing is shot and presented with such stripped down quietness and intensity and the dialogue, like I mean, it's an epic scene. It probably is in the top 5 scenes of all time. And the fact that they beat that expectation is just unbelievable, right? I mean, I can't even imagine going to watch this movie in the theaters, especially here in the US when it came out. Like, how do you beat that expectation? So that happens. And then finally, in this watch that I had, I don't know, I kept thinking about all the other people in the movie, because there's such richly drawn characters, including Ashley Judd and Amy
Yeah.
Brenneman. Like, who are these people? Like, I would watch a movie about any of these people, Val and the other guy in their crew. And it's sort of the cost of what they're going through. And, normally a movie like this would just shortchange all the other people, right? But there's enough depth given to all of those people. You understand how they're bouncing off of these two main guys and the cost that they have to pay, but yet they can't resist these people and they could walk out, but they're unable to do that. So I think the relationship ultimately on this watch to me, it was less of a cop thief movie. It was less of an action movie. It was a very human relationship movie, which the fact that that can exist in a movie like this is mind-blowing in itself. Like, you don't expect that from a movie like this, but it's so rich and so deep. So, yeah, that's why it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, it totally is. And actually, last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, I watched for the first time the TV movie that came before this. So Michael Mann wrote this as a TV
Right.
movie, late 80s, called LA Takedown. And it's basically like an hour and a half, so it is shorter. But the there's entire scenes that are word for word the same. So the
Mm,
Kate Mantilini scene, which is the restaurant where De Niro and Pacino meet, is almost like word for word the same, but delivered by two different actors. And again, no offense to these guys at all, but it is so obvious when you see that the difference between two of the greatest actors that have ever acted in American films and two competent sort of like movie of the week type actors because the way that De Niro delivers these lines and Pacino does and how they're subtly sort of like you can tell there's a cat and mouse there but there's also that sense of respect all where the dialogue's the same but the performances are different. At that moment I was watching I was like wow, like it makes this movie and especially that scene even better because you
of
see like the
course.
two actors doing it as opposed to these two. Again, I don't, no offense to those guys, I'm sure they're, they have a good career for what they have, but yeah, like the elevating that dialogue in ways that Pacino and De Niro can do is just unreal. Like for a while that restaurant was still around in LA for I think it
Right.
closed maybe like 15 years ago, and I would go quite often to it
Oh,
just to
wow.
be like, okay, I'm in this, this is that, photos up of the scene and things on the walls, and it was really fun. It was pretty close to where I live actually right now, but sadly it is now closed. But I would go there a lot of
Right.
times to just think about that scene. But I think, yeah, that scene, you're right. They hold it, and then you don't really expect it to be what it is, and then it's even every time I watch the movie, that scene gets more and more powerful because
Right.
of what is not being said, what is being acted. And yeah, I think, and I also want to say Pacino, fantastic in this film. Like
He's amazing in it.
he is so good at playing more of the I don't know, cartoony or exaggerated version of sort of what is going on. I guess he sort of pretended like he was on coke the whole time. Like he's like, my
Right.
character's a coke addict, so you can kind of tell that in some of these scenes, but it's still just it's one of his best performances too. I
It
just
really
love
is.
I love Pacino in this movie. He's so awesome.
It
He's so
really is.
awesome.
On first brush, you might sort of say, oh, De Niro is the one who's sort of, leading the charge because he's quieter and more reserved. And at least I'm typically more drawn to that kind of performance. But the more I watch the movie, it's sort of neck and neck. And there are moments where maybe Pacino even steals it because he's
Mhm.
just so good. And you feel, he can't escape this either. This is all he knows,
Right.
and it's just so tragic in his own way. So yeah, this is an epic
Yeah.
masterpiece
Beautiful
movie.
film. Yeah, I got lucky, I guess. This is my first De
I
Niro.
know.
It could have been other things that maybe we'll get into later. But okay, those are our first impressions. So now we're gonna get to our masterpieces. So these are the De Niro films that each of us feel just is his best performances for us and really exemplifies who De Niro is to us. So why don't you start, Karan? I think you got another major performance from him.
Yeah, this was a tough choice for me, as you know, because I was going back and forth between this one and another one, but I ended up choosing Raging Bull from 1980, directed again by Scorsese, starring De Niro, Kathy Moriarty, Joe Pesci. Um, and the reason I chose this as his masterpiece, even Taxi Driver, is right there. And on a different day, I might even pick Taxi Driver. But I just think everything we've been saying about De Niro in terms of commitment, intensity, playing these people who are negative or outright bad guys, but yet somehow creating empathy for them. It's all at, the highest level in this movie. But then in addition to that, I think there's something about the transformative aspect of this movie, not just external, but also internal, and the two kind of really working in concert. And that's sort of why I picked this as his masterpiece, because he's obviously in all his great performances, he transforms internally. But I think in this scenario, in this case, there's just something else going on. And right from the first frame, well, actually, you see the fat De Niro in the first frame.
Right, right, right,
But
right.
even when you see the boxer De Niro in his younger days, he looks nothing like De Niro. He looks like somebody else entirely. And I'm not even talking about the way he looks, but just the way he behaves, his attitude towards the people in his life, like how aggressive he is, but also how insecure he is about all his relationships, how self-hating he is and self-doubting he is, but yet it's almost like a child, that's who this person is, and that sort of carries on. It's tragic to see this whole thing, but yet you sort of root for him and you almost want to save him from himself. Like, what are you doing? You're destroying everything around you, the people that love you, the people are that are in your life, your own career, and then of course what ends up happening with him as the movie goes on. So yeah, that's why this is my masterpiece for just that sheer commitment, nuance, and just complete transformation. What about you? What's your reaction on
Yeah.
him?
So I had heard about this movie mainly because of the transformation piece. So when I first saw it, I don't know, like 25 years ago or something like that, that was what I was most focused on and was most surprised by. Because I mean, at the time when I was watching it, like late or early 2000s, this sort of thing had been done, a couple times after this of like actors, gaining a lot of
Right.
weight or losing a lot of weight. But this is, I think, one of the first examples of this. De Niro really committed himself. I mean, he lost and yeah, he no gained 70 pounds, which is a lot of weight, like a lot of weight to gain. And you can tell it is not makeup.
No.
Absolutely, you can tell this is actually him, and the way that you just got to gain weight in interesting ways, kind of your body does. So that piece is still, I think, just shocking every time I see this movie from
Right.
that first frame of him, when he's the fat De Niro, and then it just cuts back, and back in time to when he's lost all the weight. You're like, whoa, this is just like what a committed performance physically. But I think you're right on the non-physical stuff too. This is in a way like a he always, like I said, for me, he plays like dangerous guys, and this guy is definitely dangerous and could kind of at any moment, and as he does in this movie, kind of snaps out with intense violence around the people that he loves, his girlfriends, his wife, his brother. But it's a different type of violence where in some of these other roles, I think he is confident, even when he's playing a guy who's damaged, like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, or we'll get
Right.
into King of Comedy. These people have problems, but confidence is not one of them. And maybe the problem is they're confident in that they're crazy and they're still confident. But this character is so incredibly damaged and so incredibly insecure. And the way that De
Yeah.
Niro can capture that in these kind of small moments, and you really understand, wow, this is where this guy's pain is coming from and why
Yeah.
he hurts all the people around him, including himself, which is sort of, I think, some
Right.
of the hardest scenes in this movie are those scenes when he is just like self kind of hurting himself, physically hurting himself.
Yeah.
Really, I think to me, one of his best scenes of any movie that he's been in is when he's in the jail cell as
Oh
like
my
a later De Niro,
gosh.
and he's just like hitting his head against the
It's just
wall.
so
Just
sad.
so sad, so powerful, like so hard to watch something like that. But again, so believable. You think this character would have gotten there, and such commitment to De Niro that he would sort of go through that type of emotion in front of the camera. So I think there's several performances of his that I think inarguably could be some of the best ever committed to film, and this definitely is one of them. He just is, yeah, just amazing, amazing in this film.
He just is. Since you mentioned that scene, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the other scene when he is Fat Nero and he runs into Pesci and
Oh
he's trying
yeah.
to put his arm around him and just sort of saying that, oh, let's meet again and what have you. That's when I wept the first time I watched it, and I once again wept when I watched it recently.
Hmm.
It just is because that sort of is the cherry on this cake, if you will, right? Like this sort of sadness and loneliness and hauntingness, and especially in this chapter of his life, is always going to live. I don't know if Pesci's going to come see him or call him. I don't think he will.
I don't think so either. Yeah, I think
Yeah, and
that's.
you know that, and I think he knows that too. It's
Hmm.
it's written on his face, right? That and it's that. I mean, the jail cell scene is him harming himself physically, like you said, realizing, what have I done? But this is almost sort of like living with what I've done,
Hmm.
and that this is what my life is going to be for the rest of my life. With
Right.
no love, people who were in my life, they're all away. I am who I am, overweight, at these comedy clubs and that's sort of that. And it's sort of that realization of that, not in a violent way, but in like a sad, dejected kind of way. It's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, I
But
mean, he only does it to himself too. I think that's part
yeah,
of maybe his realizations movie. I always try to wrestle with whether he realizes that or not, or that scene at the end of the movie when he's reciting from On the Waterfront, where, Brando's character in that is sort of blaming other people for the fact that he
right.
failed. I don't know if that is supposed to mean
Mm,
that he doesn't realize this and he still thinks that it was something in the world or his brother, people are out to get him like he always kind of
yeah,
feels, or whether that is some kind of like cathartic, admission that yeah, he knows he screwed up his entire life, which he definitely did. I don't know, but
Yeah.
I love that scene
I
too.
don't I don't think he realizes that he's the culprit entirely. It's more of just realizing that this is what my life is going to be now, probably. But
Hmm.
I don't think I think he still blames the world. At least that's my take on it. But as a movie, I mean, again, this is sort of in the pantheon of movies and Scorsese's movies, and rewatching it after a while this time, of course, all the obvious stuff of like the filmmaking, the cinematography, and the way
Oh
the
yeah.
boxing scenes are shot. You're there in the ring, and so much was written about them, and a million movies have copied all of that since. So real and visceral, but it still feels fresh to me. I don't know. I mean, I know that this is how this movie is, but still, you can't believe it that, oh, you're there in the ring with them. And there's something about the black and white photography that sort of elevates that even further. The way all the relationship fights, and even when he's getting to know about Kathy Moriarty and the flirtation and the repression and all of that, the way that's portrayed, but also the way it's shot, it's sort of a masterclass in directing and every other department. My only thing is that from a pure story screenplay standpoint, I think there's some loose ends, if you will, and choppiness, if you will. But it's just very minor, and I don't think that's the point of the movie. Like the point of the movie, it's a character study. You're supposed to kind of be with this person. There's a little bit of sort of screenplay stuff that comes up in my mind, especially in this last watch of like, oh, like when all that brawl happened with Kathy Moriarty's character out sort of seemingly with the other guys and Joe Pesci losing it and what have you. And months passed by, and I was like, when is De Niro going to bring up or ask about it? And he doesn't. And then finally he starts, lashing out at everybody that, oh, you didn't tell me about this, what happened? And those sort of things sort of felt a bit weird to me, like, oh, what, why, and why didn't he ask about this earlier, and blah blah blah. But it's very minor. I think it's still one of the greatest movies ever made, and from a directing standpoint, it's just a masterclass.
Yeah, yeah, I sort of interpreted that stuff a little bit of just like, I mean, his issue is he doesn't communicate what he wants, what he's feeling at all.
Yeah, it
So
just
maybe
comes
the
to
not,
him.
yeah, the not talking about it thing. I mean, I think this movie is such a example of like people who need to go to therapy. I mean, if
Hmm.
I was sitting through this movie and be like, God, if Jake could just like go see a therapist, like it would, it could completely solve his issues. Instead, he just sort of like stuck in this cycle of just the most obvious example of what they call like toxic masculinity in terms of
Right.
what he's doing, hurting himself, hurting other people, not being able to sit in his feelings. You just really want him to just go to therapy, even though he doesn't. But what sort of struck me on this watch, this is maybe like the fourth time I've seen the film, is just how besides sort of the boxing scenes, which are incredible and very flashy and showy, it is a very small, intimate film that is almost
Yeah.
sometimes feels like it's a stage play of just three characters, Joe Pesci, De Niro, and then De Niro's girlfriend slash wife in terms of how they're doing things. Like a kitchen sink drama. So much of this movie is so effective in that
Yeah.
too,
So effective.
that you sometimes, I kind of, like you said, sort of associate so much of this film with the incredible boxing sequences that are just so cinematic and so, groundbreaking, and that they were not trying to be real, like reflection of what boxing is like, more like how it feels and what the characters are
Mm.
going through is a much more, I think Scorsese even said like he didn't want to make a sports movie. He doesn't consider it a sports movie because it's not really
No.
about the sports. It's about this character like self-destructing, and the
Right.
boxing scenes are mirrors of what he's dealing with emotionally versus
Right.
like, a Rocky movie when it's simply just about the excitement of the boxing match.
Right.
It's not about that at all with this. And in a
No.
way, it makes the boxing more painful because you're
You can't
feeling every
love.
punch. It's
Yeah.
so hard. And that one ring, that's fight too, when he basically just takes it because the guy, he just letting him hit him because
Ugh.
he hates himself. He wants to feel this physical pain in a way that to torture him his own self by letting this other guy just keep hitting him and hitting him, and it's just so hard to watch. But there's all that stuff is so cinematic. I sort of was remembering the movie being more like that, and actually
Mm.
it is very small, intimate drama mainly, and just so well done. And that like you said, it's a character study of
Yeah.
this one guy and his relationships around him and how he's destroying every single one of them. Just what a
Yeah, the
incredible film.
directing and even the writing in those scenes is just amazing. And the performances, I mean, obviously he's great, but Kathy Moriarty and Joe Pesci are also delivering kind of career best performances in my mind. Like they are people who also are trapped with this person, and it says a lot about people like this who are really suffering and damaged,
Hmm.
what they do to people around them and how they kind of bring these people in their orbit and the vortex that they also can't escape, right? And
Right.
they know better, but they just can't escape it. So and but you still feel the love from both of these people, the sadness that they feel towards this person that always there unquestionably to help and support him till a very, very long time. Because
Right.
they still hold hope, right? That, okay, maybe something will turn around and things might get okay, but of course they don't. I love Kathy Moriarty's performance and just the way the role is written because, Scorsese movies is not typically women oriented, but I
Hmm.
have to say, like, whenever he has like a female character in his movie, even though she may not be the lead, they are fully fleshed out characters. Like you really see this is not just the wife character who's like waiting around and just shows up, just pining and what have you. She has her own individuality. She's trying to seek her own life. She fights back. And ultimately she is like, I'm out of here, right?
Right.
So yeah, so I loved how the whole cast and the characters are kind of mounted. Otherwise, the movie will feel very one note, and Scorsese knows that. Yeah, you make that self-destruction, like you said, richer by showing the impact of that on the people around you.
Absolutely. I think this movie could have easily fallen into a trap of just being a showpiece for the main actor playing Jake
Right,
and just De Niro, and he's amazing, he's amazing. But it is a ensemble or
right,
three ensemble, right, with Pesci and her, and it's that focus on all three of them and how they interact that just makes this movie so amazing. It makes sort of De Niro's journey in this film too, and Jake's journey even more powerful because you
right,
see the impact of the people around him and how they do want to help, even though they don't know how either. I think, Pesci's also, as his brother, has gone through some things too that they're hinting at in the past with how they came up, and obviously, I think his wife's character too has dealt with some things. Clearly, she runs in bad crowds with bad guys, so you don't
right,
blame them for not being able to know how to deal with him and hoping that he'll just fix himself, but he never does, and I think that's what is the makes this movie so powerful. And it's not a redemption story at all. It's like a self-destruction story, and at the end, yeah, maybe he doesn't even realize it, which is the saddest thing of all. Even though he's lost everything, he still is like, angry at the world, which so many of these scenes in here, you feel like he's just mad at the world. And people that mad at the world, it just comes from a lack of self-confidence and pain that they're dealing with, but they blame everyone but themselves, even though it's
right.
all their fault.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard watch though, I have to say. Like you have to sort of clear out the day to
Yeah, yeah.
watch Raging Bull, but it delivers certainly. One last thing I'll mention is that the flirtation scenes, even though she's very young in the movie, but I guess a different time in the 40s,
Hmm.
but when they're first kind of meeting and courting each other, I don't, this time watching it, it really struck to me like I don't associate Scorsese with like romance and even, that kind of flirtation and intrigue that you feel when you meet somebody for the first time. But it's just so beautifully captured. It's sexy. It's sort of, tongue in cheek. You can see that these people are drawn to each other. The black and white photography. I mean, she looks great and he looks great. So I wasn't expecting that aspect to shine at all in a movie like this. So I don't know. I was taken back by that this time.
Yeah, that is a fun scene by the pool when there's sort of the
Yeah.
initial kind of interactions
You're in
and
the car and everything when they go
yeah.
for a drive. It's kind of, and you almost hope that, oh, things might turn around for him, because
Hmm.
he looks happy actually for once.
Oh yeah.
But
Yeah,
of course it
yeah.
doesn't.
No, and that's the tragedy of it. I think you need those high moments of hope in the for the audience to
Yes.
then when he does lose everything, like, oh, he was so close,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
fantastic film.
All right. With that, what is your masterpiece of De Niro?
So we're moving on to another Scorsese movie. We've covered three in this episode, which I just
Uh,
think fits well with what we talked about at the top of the episode
right.
too. Of this pairing between the two of them just brings out magic. And you even mentioned Taxi Driver, which we're not talking about, but we have in a previous episode.
Right.
So I'll link that below. But just another example of how great they are together. But this film is their film, The King of Comedy from 1982. So, the IMDb plot summary: Rupert is an aspiring stand up comedian who is willing to go the extra mile in his attempt to appear in the late night show hosted by his idol. So, like I mentioned, Scorsese directed this film starring Robert De Niro and Jerry Lewis. So, for me, this is a film that I came to a little later in my watching of De Niro films and even Scorsese films as well. Like it was not a film that did very well, so it wasn't at the top of sort of my list and to see. And I think the film's definitely come around a lot more and talked about as a
Hmm.
masterpiece, as just a film, which we'll get into in a bit. But when I first saw it, it didn't really have that critical reappraisal. So for me, I think what makes this movie so great with the De Niro performance is this is a character that feels incredibly real. I feel like this guy exists probably, hundreds of them are out there today in terms of someone who is so obsessed with being famous and they're trying to latch themselves onto somebody who's also famous. But he is, for the first time, at least for me, he's playing someone who is harmless. Like he's a weirdo and he's very aggressive, but unlike, Jake or the character in Cape Fear or all these other characters that I associate with Robert De Niro of like, oh, he could, kill you at any moment or attack you physically. This guy is not that. And the fact that he's able to walk this line of like being this really weird guy who's very pushy and awkward socially, but not dangerous at any time, even though he does some kidnapping in the movie. So he is,
Right.
not completely, a non-violent. But I think that being able to walk that fine line and sort of push back against his own persona, I think just shows how he can sort of exemplify one thing as an actor, but then kind of put that away, and you sort of forget that he is the De Niro from like Raging Bull or Taxi Driver, and you sort of get lost in this character of Rupert. Is like, oh, this is sort of like a harmless guy, even though he's a little bit weird. And then I do feel that he's able to bring an intense sense of empathy towards this guy too, where the film does this as it goes along. We'll kind of get into the film a little bit later, but you sort of more is revealed about this character, and in the way that De Niro like kind of vaguely kind of shows who this guy, where he came from, how he's actually really lonely, how his, mom doesn't actually exist anymore, has already passed away. And it's you're able to feel bad for this guy, even though he's a total weirdo and like not totally socially awkward and doing things that are like completely inappropriate with women, and then with the his idol, which is played by Jerry Lewis in the film. But you kind of feel for him in some way. Like I feel bad for him, and I do want him to succeed, even though he is kind of, yeah, he's the villain in the movie, honestly, actually, if I really think about
Hmm.
it. So that walking both those fine lines to me, I think is something that is incredibly admirable from a character or an actor playing a character who you would assume this guy would, yeah, want to just have this big scene at the end where he massacres everyone on the set of the picture, starts punching people because he's so full of rage, but he doesn't have that. So I think this is for me the performance that just stands out when I think of De Niro now, the more and more times I see this film. So what was your impression of De Niro in this film?
Yeah, by the way, what you just said at the end, that's the movie The Joker. So we have that.
Oh, right.
Movie
Yeah, and that
one
movie
is pretty
sucked.
bad.
That's right. And that movie sucked. That's true. Yeah, actually, you're right. Yeah. Which, yeah, that's true. The Joker basically steals the entire setup of this film. In a way, it's more of a remake of this than anything else. But
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts on De Niro in this picture?
Yeah, I had not seen this movie before preparing for this podcast, for the reasons you talked about. And then even though it's been reprised in the culture, I just somehow escaped it. And it was sort of my big blind spots. I was very happy to finally see it. And yeah, everything you said, I would just add that it's that performance where I kept waiting that he's going to flip and do something really bad, really wrong. And it just never happens. And
Hmm.
initially in the first read of the movie, I even felt disappointed by that. And maybe that's why it didn't do well when it first came out. But then the day after, it stayed with me much, much longer. It was so powerful to kind of see this person, which, like you said, is not a bad guy, but he's just very, very weird, very socially awkward, stunted, confident in his own weirdness, but
Hmm.
obviously not well mentally. Another case of sort of, therapy would do Rupert Pupkin great. Uh, but he inspires a lot of empathy in you, of course. The other thing I would say is that a character like this who's relentlessly going on, doing what he's doing, but it's almost one note to a degree, right? Like it's
Hmm.
the same thing, never gives up, is going to show up no matter what at the office, blah, 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 acting out as kind of, being on the talk show, late night show scenes that never goes. That credit to him and the movie where that could feel A, repetitive,
Hmm.
and B, you also, there's a very fine line between making somebody empathetic and watchable versus tuning out, right? That you could sort of say, okay, this person is just doing the same thing over and over again. You know what? I feel for you, but also bye, you know?
Right. Yeah, kind of like what Jerry Lewis is trying to do to him. You're done. Yeah,
Yeah,
like just leave. Yeah.
just leave. But he somehow, and that's the brilliance of the performance, is that he keeps you engaged. You empathize with him. You also pity him, but you also sort of want him to get there. It's such a fine line without really anything happening other than him doing the same thing over and over again, with the exception of slight escalation towards the end.
Right.
So
Right.
it's sort of it's a master class in acting and also transformation. Talk about that. Like, this is not an outwardly, prosthetic transformation performance, but there's so much he's doing internally that it all shows up on his face and his body language, which makes him look like nothing like who he is at all. And it's again like a masterclass kind of transformation achievement in my mind. Like, Rupert Pupkin is nothing like Robert De Niro or any other De Niro's we've seen in any other movie, which is kind of incredible. So yeah, I was very happy to watch it, and it deserves to be in that masterpiece category for De Niro as a performance.
Yeah, yeah, I think it stands out, like you said, amongst these other
Yeah,
roles that people know him for, even like a Goodfellas or even like Cape Fear, like we mentioned earlier. But that is like what I think is so impressive about this, because you're expecting that, like you said, but it doesn't ever come. And I think too, like this movie, which I've now seen maybe 4 times. I just every time I see this, it just gets better and better, and it's
I
now
bet.
like in my top 4 Scorsese films. Like even after I watch it this time, it's like sometimes I watch a movie that is so good, it just like I just get floored and just almost like just I don't know, like can't just do anything. I'm just sort of frozen in awe of the art that I just saw and what this movie's able to do. I just every time I see it, it's like, oh my God, all the themes that it's hitting and the levels that it's hitting, the things that it's trying to say and what happens in it. So I think this also is something that the film that deserves a lot more acclaim within what Marty did. I mean, this is a character who is lonely like the Travis Bickle taxi driver character, but he is trying to fill that void instead of with purpose, like Travis Bickle trying to assassinate, the politician. It's just with fame, and he doesn't want fame because he likes to perform. He wants fame because he wants the adoration from the audience, which is not the reason why true artists deliver art, because they care about the art and they want to put their message and their art out into the world. And obviously they hope that they get acclaim, and some people love the acclaim or some people are, a little uncomfortable with it. But the reason why you become an artist is not to be famous. But
Right.
some people are. And I think this movie is a perfect example of those people that all they want to do is just be famous. And I think this movie is a little prescient in that sense too, of now we have avenues, whether it's reality TV or YouTube or social media or being an influencer, where you are just famous for being famous. You're not doing anything like Jerry Lewis in this film, who's a professional host.
Hmm.
You're just not, but you want the fame and you want it to fill some loneliness and an emptiness inside of you, which is the movie is so brilliant in how you don't really realize any of his backstory. You assume that his mom still exists in that
Right.
apartment. And then later, because there's so many incredible uses of fantasy sequences, we're not really sure what's real and what's not, in the same way that Rupert confuses reality and fantasy all the time. And I think that
So brilliant.
so brilliant, just incredible in how they weave that in to the film.
Totally. And then I think placing the Sandra Bernhard character is so critical because this is also somebody who's obviously mentally ill, trying
Hmm.
to fill that void, wants to be with Jerry Lewis, but you see sort of slightly different notes of that kind of madness or paranoia, whatever, where De Niro almost feels childlike and there's almost like an innocence and purity to his damage versus Sandra Bernhard has a lot more rage and wildness to her that she can do whatever. And I mean, the scenes between the two of them are also very interesting, where De Niro is the straight guy in front of
Yes.
her. At
Yes.
least that's what he thinks. And I think he kind of is, but you're both not well. You should not be hanging out with each other at all.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that, but that character is so important to kind of juxtapose. Otherwise, once again, you can fall in that one note sort of thing that, okay, this is just one person and this is just a showcase on this one person, this one performance, but this is why Marty is Marty, right? He peppers in all these people in the movie, and the movie opens up with that amazing scene of Jerry Lewis leaving and this mob is around. Like that establishing is so critical. Otherwise, you'll be like, oh, why are people doing this for him? And so it's not just these two people, it's an epidemic. It seems that this is the world we are living in. The stakes are so high, and some of those people have just crossed the other line.
Hmm.
So yeah, but it's also a fun movie, weirdly,
It
despite being
is.
so kind of dire and serious. It's funny and fun. And I love what you're saying about the playing with what's real versus not, which is funny in itself. Like there's a lot of hijinksy sort of things.
Yeah.
Even the kidnapping at the end is sort of hijinksy, even though you're waiting that, oh my gosh, something really bad is going to happen now. They really crossed the line, but it sort of doesn't. So yeah, it's a genius movie, which I'm not surprised it didn't do well because when it came out, I think it's a movie that needs a lot of pondering and reconsideration and repeat viewing. And I empathize because when this movie came out, everybody knew Scorsese and De Niro for a kind of thing, and
Hmm.
they're not delivering that in this
Right.
movie.
Exactly. No,
So people were like, "What is this?" You know?
exactly. Yeah, I think I understand why it didn't do well.
Yeah,
Even though again, I think it is one of my favorite movies and one
it's
of
so
his
good.
best. Another, I just want to also call like Jerry Lewis in this movie, who is not
So
an
good.
actor I'm a huge fan of his comedies, but he's so good in this of being someone who is understanding enough. Like he'll be
Right.
nice in the beginning, especially to root really entertain the possibility of okay, maybe you send me your material, whatever. But the way that he just sort of calmly reacts to everything in
Right.
each of these situations too. I mean, De Niro shows up at his house in his country home, inside of his house, drinking his alcohol, and he comes in and like instead of just lashing at him, calling the police, get out, like, beating him up. He just sort of like, look, like, what are you doing? You got to leave. Like, he's so mature about this. And the other thing I love about this movie, too, is, Jerry Lewis's character is this major star who has all this adoration, all this fame, but all the scenes with him outside of him being on the stage doing the show, he's alone. Like he
Right.
eats alone with like a TV dinner in his apartment in New York in one scene, and then in his country home, it's this giant house, and does he have family there? No, he has two
The
servants, and
staff.
yeah, he just has some staff, and his life actually does not look great. Like in a
Yeah.
way, he's as lonely as Rupert
Yeah.
is, even though Rupert thinks that, oh, I can get this fame, and all of a sudden the adoration will fill this void when you have this character who has everything he wants, but he doesn't look very happy,
No.
and lonely, and really even satisfied with where his life is at. I mean, he's financially secure, but he's still not. There's an emptiness to him too. And I love that the juxtaposition. He wants this thing, De Niro does. Does he really want it? Is it really going to help him? I just think that
No.
is so brilliant. And I also just have to mention before we move on to the our wild cards, just the ending of this movie when De
No.
Niro's up there giving that comedy performance, which again, you have to assume it's real, but you don't really know it could be real or fantasy. But the way that the script, which I think is brilliant, weaves in these anecdotes because he's doing a stand-up comedy bit, and they're sort of like, "Oh, when I was growing up, my dad did these sort of things," and he's telling real jokes, and they are actually funny. But it's for the very first time you're like, "Oh, this actually is probably all real." Like his dad
Right.
did hit him like this and treat him like this, and like he's turning this horribly tragic backstory into a funny routine. Whereas an audience member, because even in that bit too, in that stand-up bit he does, he says, "Oh yeah, I captured Jerry Lewis's character. He's all tied up, and everyone's laughing like it's a joke." But the audience knows that's not a joke. So we immediately must assume that all these other anecdotes, which are incredibly tragic, are
Hmm.
actually real. And the way they reveal this character's backstory, I think, is just so incredibly amazing, and just in the script and also in his performance when he's up there doing that stand-up bit is just masterclass in filmmaking and acting and everything. It's just one of my favorite parts of the movie. It just ends on such an incredible high note with that. I get blown away even every time I see it, and even thinking about it, it's giving me
I
chills.
couldn't agree more. And it deepens the movie, right? Number one, he's pretty good because I
He
think
is.
if he were really bad, I think the movie would just leave you, it'll still be a great movie, but it'll just have like a different note to it. The second thing is what you're saying, which is that we've heard this time and time again. Great comics are essentially using the material of their life and the pain of their life to be great comics. So when you start to see that in him, you sort of wonder, huh, are you actually that mad or that bad? Because you're doing the same thing that
Hmm.
like all the other guys did, and they were able to make big out of it. So it's a great sort of engagement with the audience that, who's actually, because you're the ones who are watching and laughing at this stuff, right? So are the enabler, you're complicit in all of this madness. So it just deepens the meaning of the movie, I think, without sort of hammering it on your head.
Yeah, that's a really good point in the end. And also, the movie is kind of turning it back on you because in the film, I mean, I assume this is real, but again, you don't know what the fantasy or reality. He does actually achieve success, even though he's involved in this kidnapping. And, there are
Right.
people that like him and he has sort of this fame. And in a way, it's sort of then saying, like, who are we as these audience members eating up this stuff when this guy is not right? Like, he
Yeah,
is not right. He's done these horrible things and this kidnapping and everything like that, but we just don't care. We just want to be entertained. I think there's some sort of, turning the camera on the audience moment
definitely.
that I think is also brilliant. So that's a really good point. Just definitely a film that if folks haven't seen this yet, I cannot recommend this movie enough. And I think it is kind of coming back into the culture and getting the adoration it deserves, but I cannot speak more highly of King of Comedy. Definitely recommend.
That's a
So
great one.
on that note, wild card times. These are the movies of him. We just want to bring in something else for a specific reason. And what do you got for us? And what is your reason for it being a wild card?
Okay, so my wild card is a more recent movie from 2015, The Intern, directed by Nancy Meyers, starring De Niro, Anne Hathaway, Rene Russo. So if listeners have watched or listened to the podcast before, I'm definitely a Nancy Meyers fan. So there's a bunch of her rom-coms that I actually do enjoy and love. When I heard about this movie, I was like, oh wow, what a casting. And especially after watching De Niro in, years and years of doing bad comedies and what have you, I was like, oh, what is this going to be about? And I was sort of blown away. And the reason why this is a wild card for me is that even though De Niro often kind of has this pathos and warmth to his characters, which are bad guys or negative guys or in between people, and that's why you empathize with them. And this is the movie where all those other negative, dark aspects are kind of stripped away, and what you're left with is this complete human being who's just warm. And it just is so moving to me to watch him like this and the way he looks, the way he carries himself, and the way he interacts with the younger people in the office, and particularly his relationship with Anne Hathaway, which ends up sort of taking this friend slash father figure slash uncular figure, whatever you want to call it, and a guide, almost like an angel, if you will, in her life when she needs it most. It's just so, I don't know, wonderful and moving, like I said, to watch him. And it's a committed performance. Like, this is not him phoning in. He's done a lot of comedies and such with Zac Efron and what have you. This is not that. Like, he shows up, and understand everything about this person. And kudos to the writing as well. Like, there's so much detail that you get out of him and his relationship with his wife that passed away and how he lives and precision and sort of old-fashioned values, right? Which are not just modeled externally, but from inside out. And you see that in him, and that's why this is my wildcard performance for him. Had you watched this movie before, or if so, what did you think of it?
I have not, which I'm sure you're not surprised. Peter,
No.
I had not seen this. So the movie didn't really work for me. We'll get into the film in a second. So on the De Niro part, I do think even though this does come from a period of his career where, again, not to be mean to him, but I think he's been putting in a lot of lazy performances. And this is not a lazy performance. Like you can tell he is embodying this role of, yeah, like a sweet old man, basically. And that's what he is putting off. He's not dangerous. There's not that sense of what's going to happen or what's he going to do. He just really comes across as this gentle old guy who, yeah, has been through some tragedy and just trying to live day by day in the best way that he can. And that's all believable. And I think he can pull off that, yeah, cute old man thing. He actually can do that in this movie. And yeah, it's a comedy, but not as goofy as some of his other performances that he's done, which sometimes it can work, and we'll get into one of those in a bit. And Meet the Parents too, I think was a little goofy, and we
Right.
talked about that in a previous episode. I think he does a great job in that movie. But this is more of a lighthearted, kind of more grounded comedy as Nancy Meyers does. And I think he fits well into that type of story that she likes to tell. These feels like a real guy, it's not an over exaggerated character. And yeah, I think that he committed to this. I will say I did find like the movie pretty boring and not engaging. And with him, I thought the only scene where he really to me like kind of came alive a little more was when there was a heist sequence when they're trying to go and steal a laptop from Anne Hathaway's mom's apartment because of a bad email that was sent. It's like all of a sudden, like when he's in this mode of like, I'm the commander of this crime operation. I'm being a little exaggerated, but like now he's in the role of like the guy from Heat or, Goodfellas, where he's like, no, you guys got to do this and get in there and get this thing. I was like, okay, now like all of a sudden the movie has some energy. Like this is sort of the De Niro I'm kind of used to a little bit more instead of the kindly old man De Niro. Like that scene had a lot of energy and verve to it, which the rest of the movie I just kind of, to me, was sort of very flat and sort of uninteresting, even though the concept was good. But that scene, I was like, okay, this is like De Niro, like he knows exactly what he's doing. And I thought that scene was very funny, and he was very good in it too. But yeah, like
Yeah,
o
he's very good in
overall,
that, but I mean, I obviously disagree because I
yeah, you
think
like the
to
film, yeah,
me, I mean, I like the movie. It's not in my pantheon of Nancy Meyer movies. I will say that, and we can talk more about the movie. But just going back to De Niro, I
yeah,
think in addition to sort of the kindness and the warmth, I think the way he's presented and the way he embodies that this is somebody who lived a rich life, was really accomplished, really good at what he does, but is not there to sort of force his weight on people just because he's lived this great life and has all this wisdom. But then that wisdom and care and all that comes through in a very selfless way, but in a very restrained kind of way, in a very gentlemanly kind of way. Like, I guess I'm on the side of Nancy Myers that they don't make him like this. The older I get, the more respect I have for, my father and people of his generation and such, like people who are not, going around sort of bossing around their way just because they live their lives. And there are people like that too in every age. But for the most part, people of that age group in my life are people like him, who've done things and they're this reservoir of wisdom and such. And I don't know, the older I get, the more I want to lean on that. So, and he really shows that in this movie, I think. Otherwise, it would be the cute old man story, but to me, it's not. And that's why this movie is engaging and its performance is engaging to me right from the first frame because you see all of that. You want to know more about this person. Like, oh, what was the life that you lived? And it's slowly revealed to you, including the fact that he was a VP of sales or whatever at some other company in this exact office building. It's revealed to you
yeah.
later, which is, I know
That
it's a little
I
cheesy,
I
but
face palmed literally in real life when that happened. I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, movie, what are you doing?
yeah, it's
Why
a
are
little
you?" Yeah, but
cheesy.
anyway, sorry, but
But the point is that this is somebody who's he's lived an accomplished life, and
yeah,
I don't know. My back is always up when people kind of discount and disregard older people just because they're old.
right.
The older I get, I'm more like, no, we need to lean in and learn from what they did, the mistakes they made, the triumphs they had. They've obviously had more experience than us, and the truth is, nobody knows anything about what they're doing.
That's
I
true. Yeah.
certainly don't. So, huh?
I said that's true. We don't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't. So, but I would at least trust somebody who's had more experience. So I don't know. That's why this works on me. But yeah, as a movie, to kind of get into that, the concept is great, I think.
Yeah.
I think up till the final act, I think this thing of how Anne Hathaway, who's this really successful, committed person who's built this whole company, like I really empathize and that her story really resonated. Like we both work in technology related, companies and industries, and I've definitely felt those sacrifices, but and definitely been around founders like that, like who are really smart, but at some point they can't really sort of be the be all end all because they just can't scale, but
Right.
it's hard for them to see that. But should they even see that? Because after all, this is their baby. They know what this thing is the best. So I think the movie is really smart about playing with that dynamic of like, okay, should you step back or should you not? And what would happen to the company? You see her in all of her lights of how good she is, but also kind of a stickler she is and a pain in the ass in the most nice way without her even realizing that she's being this way. And I think Anne Hathaway is great in this movie. I think where the movie crumbles for me is all the home stuff that's happening with the husband and the affair he's having and the fact that it's a happy ending, which in my mind it shouldn't be. That's where the movie kind of lost me because up till that point it felt really credible in her story and then De Niro and her story together.
Yeah, I agree that the concept was good. When it started out, I'm like, okay, this is a great high concept for a movie. And an old person comes into a job and like hijinks will ensue in the office with the old man. So I was like, okay, I like this setup. And then it didn't like nothing really happened. I'm like, well, so what's going on? Like, you're not leading into the old man in the office shtick, which I thought would have been interesting. And then I just felt that Anne Hathaway's character just wasn't as interesting enough for me. Like, it sort of reminded me of those times when you're in a job interview and it's like, what's your biggest weakness? I just work too hard. And it's just, I can't help but work so hard. Like, the whole movie, like, that's what her thing is. Like, she's too good and too hard and has to be involved in every little thing. Like, I don't know. I'm just like, okay, like, great. That's great. So that piece didn't hold my interest very much. I guess I kept waiting for stuff to happen. I guess with the setup was great. I was like, oh, I could see this being a good sitcom. I could tune in on
No.
Tuesday nights on NBC at 8:30, seeing an old man as intern in office. Like, okay, I get that. But yeah, maybe I mean clearly didn't lean into that enough. And
That is
another
not a
direction.
movie or show I want to watch.
Oh, I'd watch that. I'd watch Old Man in Office. Because this is also a typical setup for a film too, where it's like, a typical environment where some, magical or strange element gets injected in, like the Mary Poppins template, right? I was like, okay, maybe this is like he's gonna do something here, but so yeah, he's cleaning a desk and he's driving a car and he just listens to Anne Hathaway's problems, and then the movie sort of ends. Like, I don't know. I just didn't not enough happened here, but I did like the setup. And I thought the movie looked good. The Office looked cool. Like I wouldn't want to work there, even though her driving the what is it, the bicycle. I was like, okay, then maybe that's a little too quirky for your own good, but fine movie. Like I'll give you that. But yeah,
I've
I just
seen that for sure.
yeah. I just was the concept was interesting enough. I was hoping for a little bit more with the story and maybe just the character drama that it was giving for me at least just wasn't enough of a story where I just wasn't. I was bored pretty much through most of the movie, and then it just kind of ends. I didn't really know what the resolution of was his character either. Like what was his? Is he just now he's doing Tai Chi? Like what? Where was he supposed to land? Because the movie became her story in sort of like the third act. And I thought his story was a little more interesting about his wife and trying to regain purpose in his life. Like that whole first 10 minutes, I'm like, oh, this is really sweet and kind of nice. Like, and then he takes a back seat, well, front seat because he's driving to Anne Hathaway's sort of storyline, which I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me. It sounds like maybe the affair stuff didn't really to you either. But yeah, where do you think his character ended up in the end? Like with what he
Yeah,
was
I
supposed
think
to
you
do?
missed the whole movie and yeah, you missed the whole movie, which
What
I'm very sad about, but
What was he supposed to like? Where was he? Yeah, what did I miss about his arc in this?
I think the big thing here is that even though he's accomplished, he lives a good life and what have you, but he has deep loneliness in his life.
Hmm.
And I think what he's accomplished by the end is sort of this newfound family in Anne Hathaway's character, the other younger guys who are there in this internship program with him, and I think he has this sense of joy. Like when you meet him, he's not depressed, but
Hmm.
he's also not joyful or buoyant. Now he and even Rene Russo's character, maybe there's something that emerges over there. Who knows? So it's a bit of a beginning on of a new lease on life, if you will. That's kind of what I take away from the movie.
Oh, the end's a beginning. Like now he has got joy back into his life. So the end of the movie is the beginning of his new chapter, which is going to be much nicer. And he sort of accepted the fact that his wife is gone. Like that's sort of his journey.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, I don't view, and the movie doesn't view life in such black or white ways either, but it's sort of like, yeah, I mean, there's more joy, there's more possibility. Otherwise, all he was doing every day was the same thing,
Yeah.
and now there's potential for more adventure and all of that in his life. Her arc, especially going back with the husband after the affair and the way all that gets resolved really quickly, like that's where I have big questions. I think they kind of rushed that whole piece, which sort of didn't really make sense to me. But other than that, her arc was interesting, kind of accepting that, okay, maybe I'm not the best fit. And to your earlier point, like, I don't see her as like, oh, just the person who's like flawless and works too hard. You see from all the other people in the office, like she's getting in the way of the work. She's getting in the way of meeting deadlines, doing great work. And yeah, when you were a startup, however long ago, you could be on every single call and send that bridesmaid all her bridesmaid dresses or
Right.
whatever. But
Yeah.
you can't be obsessing over one odd person and then giving yourself a pat on the back that, oh, I'm the best leader because I care so much. Because you're operating at a different scale. I mean, I've seen this all the time with startup leaders that they're unable to scale themselves even though they have all the best intentions at heart. So I think the movie does a great job in showing that it's a complicated thing. Like this is not a person who's bad or a person who's,
Right.
stupid or not good at their job or is checking out or phoning in or is distracted or has like devious intentions. There's none of that actually, which I think makes the character a lot more interesting and complex and kind of more real life actually.
And you didn't like the going back with the husband?
No, because that's not real in my mind. I think I wouldn't have just gone. To me, from what I learned about her character, she might have eventually forgiven and gone back, but it happens so fast that there's
Hmm.
just no time in between reconciling that, taking stock of this relationship. Where do we go from here? It just happened so fast. That's sort of how I felt. Um, and also just the way, I mean, this is a rom-com after all, right? So, and that too between De Niro and Anne Hathaway's characters, not in a platonic way,
Right, right. Very platonic. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that they don't do much with the husband character, like the actor is just whatever. There's no sort of depth or nuance to that guy. So I think that to me is a failure of the movie a little bit, because otherwise in Nancy Meyer's movies, like all characters are very richly developed, and that character is just not very well developed, and hence the reconciliation doesn't feel super earned either in my mind.
Yeah, I did feel he was pretty lame. Like every time he came on
Yeah,
screen, I'm like, you're kind of pathetic. And I don't
pathetic.
mean as like he was supposed to be that way. I think just the movie, yeah, didn't give him enough in
And the
interesting things to do.
performance too, that
Yeah,
the note that he's ringing is the guy in the toothpaste ad.
yeah, yeah.
Fine,
Right.
sure, and you then question that why would she even be with someone like this? And it sort of crumbles a little bit. And I don't think the movie's done that intentionally, that oh, she purposely is with like a lame sort of guy. I
Right.
don't think that's
Right.
purposeful. It's
N
just not well cast, I think. Sorry to
yeah.
the actor, who's a very good comedic actor. I've seen him in other things, but I don't think he's the best fit for this movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're right. It also does explain why that resolution doesn't feel earned, I guess. And it's more at HIV because I think Anne Hathaway does a great job in the film. And especially with De Niro. I think they pair really well together. And I
Yeah,
think it's always impressive when they can do these sort of plutonic friendships in movies, especially between different sexes and ages, where you're
yeah,
never at all thinking it's anything beyond that, and neither character kind of gives any hint to that too. And I think because very easily this could become across as creepy with the wrong hands as a
right.
director or even with the story. But yeah, never once we were like, oh, they're gonna get together in this movie. Like, no, it's all yeah, it's like the father-daughter or uncle relationship for sure.
Yeah, it's very well handled, and that's her arc, right? Like she's been on this hamster wheel trying to build this thing, even though she's
Mhm.
very passionate about it, cares about it, and now her identity is sort of stuck in this thing. But he is sort of bringing this sense of calmness and almost like a pause and re-reflection, reflecting on what your life is, what do you want this to be, and all of that. And you can still have your thing, he's very encouraging of her. It's not like stereotypical the way people will say old-fashioned old guys like, oh no, sit at home, don't be CEO. No, he's not
Right.
saying any of those things
Right.
actually.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of nuance in my mind, and that's what makes the movie quite fun to watch actually.
Well, when they make the TV adaptation, I'll definitely tune in on Tuesdays at 8:30 and see how what the intern the series is like. And maybe they'll put
You
Robert De
want the
Niro in
Tim
it.
Allen series or
Yeah.
whatever
Oh
playing.
yeah, we could cast Tim Allen in it. I think that this is great. This is another one of our we'll file this away in our ideas when we launch this production company for our show, and all of our different ideas we come up with we'll make. But maybe I can handle producing this one. It sounds like your heart might not be in it.
Yeah. All right. So with that, what is your final wildcard entry for De Niro?
So my wild card is another comedy. It is Analyze This from 1999. The IMDb plot summary, a comedy about a psychiatrist whose number one patient is an insecure mob boss. Directed by Helmer Ramis, starring Robert De Niro, Billy Crystal, and Lisa Kudrow. So this is a movie we actually already talked about in a previous episode, so I'll post a link to our more full discussion. But the reason for me why this was the wild card choice for De Niro, because actually this might have been one of the first other De Niro movies I saw in terms of when it came
Mm,
out around 99. And, I'd seen Heat and some other films, but I think him doing a comedy, but a comedy where it's where he plays a mobster in the world of the mob easily could have gone very much awry, where he's parodying himself from Goodfellas or himself from Godfather and really poking fun at his own on-screen persona, which he does in a sense in this movie. He's taking a tone of being a mobster, but then making it a little more goofy, but not like playing around with his own persona, which I think is a very hard thing to do and something that I think it was a risk for him to go in this type of direction with a comedy. He'd done a couple comedies before at this point, and he had not yet done Meet the Parents. And like you mentioned too, he'd make a lot of comedies after this, which are very dire and terrible. Like I would not think he's a very good comedic actor. He honestly isn't. But there's a couple exceptions to that. I think this is really one of those movies where he does a very good job of walking, again, a fine line between self-parody and a true comedic performance where it's believable that he plays a mobster who has, cries in multiple scenes in this movie, is breaking down
hmm
and, making fun of therapy and having this good back and forth with Billy Crystal, while at the same time, there is a sense of danger actually in this performance where, at least for me, I'm like, oh, this guy actually could get someone whacked. Or he could even kill someone because he probably has in the past. And that is something that also is, I think, is hard to pull off to sort of be funny, but then also be dangerous, but not so much so that it takes you out of the fact this is a comedy
Right.
movie. So I think a lot of the credit is with De Niro, but also with Harold Ramis in terms of navigating those things. So for me, about De Niro taking this swing of going into the genre he's known for and doing a comedic performance, which I think is actually very good as a comedic performance without being self-parody, which is why I thought for me this is his wild card performance. So I know we talked about the film in the past, but De Niro in this specifically, anything else you wanted to mention with how he acts in this film?
Yeah, I was thinking about what you just said, and I think that's why this works and some of the other, or rather many comedic promises don't work is because of that he's not self-parodying, is not a meme. And I
Right.
think it's less to do with De Niro. I think it's to do with just the material and the directors, like they sort of cashed in on it, right? That, oh, De Niro's going to make that sort of face that he makes with his lips, and that's going to be the thing. And and De Niro is sort of like, sure, fine, I'm in for the ride, give me the paycheck or whatever. So he's a great actor, so he can do whatever, In my mind, he can play comedy, play warmth, uncular, whatever. But yeah, this movie just pitched right, and it's smart, and he knows it and the director knows it. So it's a fun one. When we covered the movie earlier, I was sort of mid on the movie overall, even though it was a fun time. But he's great in it. I will say one thing and a bit of a digression that watching this movie made me watch Midnight Run, which I'd never seen
Oh.
before,
Oh
which
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
loved so much. Are they in the same time frame? Sorta, maybe?
Midnight Run was like late 80s, I think like 87, 88.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah,
So
that
yeah,
might have been his, well, yeah, I think he did a rom-com before that, but one of
right,
his early comedic performances. But he's
right,
more the straight man in that, I feel like,
right.
to Grodin. Whereas in this
Yeah.
movie, he's the comedic foil to, Billy Crystal's
Billy
straight
Crystal,
man.
yeah.
So, but yeah, it's just, see, that movie's great too, actually. I
So
do enjoy
good,
that film.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a good juxtaposition to kind of watch both these movies sort of back to back and think about, how he can play these people who have like a hard edge, but they also have a soft interior, but they also know the kind of movie they're in,
Hmm.
but yet not become a self-parody. So it's a very fine line, high wire act, like you said, and he's really good in it.
Yeah, and I think much like we were talking about in some of these other films too, I think the people he surrounds himself with get a little bit more into the movie.
Right.
Are great. Billy Crystal, this is definitely one of his high points too in terms of his career and his on-screen comedic performances. Lisa Kudrow is fantastic in this movie too, and the other mob guys that are surrounded by De Niro in this movie too are very much more comedic, and I think exaggerated. And I think that helps De Niro then be a little more straight-laced because he's surrounded
Right.
by these, yeah, they're more self-parodies of what you would think, Italian mob guys would be like, but that just adds to the comedy of the movie for me, which I think at the time I liked it more than I do now. I don't come back to this film very often. When at the time I thought it was great. I think I might have even seen it twice in the theaters, even though the sequel's terrible. But it still sort of lives on in my mind as like a very solid De Niro
Mm.
comedic performance. I think he tops that with the Meet the Parents performance. I think that is, I think, the best version of him as a comedian because it is completely a role he had not done up until that point of more of like the normal guy, even though obviously CIA guy. Whereas in this one, he's
Right.
at least leaning on the fact that he's done mobsters like so many times he could probably do it in his sleep, which he has done in his sleep, played mobsters like in Alto Knights, in my opinion. But yeah, I do think this movie still holds up for what it is and is not something
The
where I would
Alto
say is
Knights, you
yeah.
mean?
Oh, that's why it's called Alto Nights because they you fall asleep.
Right.
That's good. Maybe that's where the name comes from. No, obviously, it doesn't. But yeah, so I wanted to bring this movie back in, and I think I post a link below. We can where we get more into the film. But yeah, that was analyze this and our six De Niro films. So what now that we've talked about many different performances he's done over the years, and some of them will be covered from comedies to very very serious drama pictures. What do you want to see De Niro do next?
I think maybe this is just recency bias of watching not Alto Knights, but like the Intern, the last. Yeah, hell no. But I would love to see De Niro in a more warm sort of character piece, and I don't know who might make it, but yeah, he's not done too many of these. Maybe it could be a later in life kind of romance with kind of comedic elements, but not an out and out comedy, but a more of a romance, sort of light, warm character piece, somebody. That would be fun to see him do because he hasn't done much of that. What about you?
Yeah, and when he has it, hasn't been like not sorry successful. So I think he has more room to do that really
Yeah.
well. For me, I think especially with this sort of rewatch and really rethink about De Niro, I think you made this point earlier that it's really about who he's paired with as having that director who he really works well with. So I know in a way the Irishman's sort of like the perfect final
Hmm.
main performance. I know he was in Kills the Flower Moon, but the main sort of like leading performance with Scorsese. But I'd love to see the two of them work together again. I think it shows that De Niro, having done two of his the only, I don't want to say only good performances, but at least the best performances he's done in the last 25 years be with Marty, that I'd love to see them continue to work together to as long as Marty wants to keep making films, because I think that no matter what he does, if it maybe it's back into a comedy more like King of Comedy or another serious picture like Killers of the Flower Moon, I think the two of them paired together are always just magic, and I those are the kind of performances, just really good ones. I don't really care
Right.
necessarily what the genre is, but I know Robert De Niro can still deliver this stuff. That it'd be good to have him end more on a couple high notes before he retires, instead of have the Alto Knights be the that those types of films be the last ones that he
Yeah.
does. It just it makes him sort of end his career on a whimper more than a bang, and he definitely has more bangs in him. So and no pun intended with a mob story in terms of a bang, but doesn't matter what it is. I'd love to see him kind of go out on more of a higher note.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, if it's a Marty movie, he'll bring it, and the material will be worth his talents. So that's definitely a good point. All right. So now that our De Niro discussion is kind of coming to an end, do you want to share what we'll be covering and talking about next?
Yeah, we're covering another actor who's been around the block, for several decades and had very different parts of his career, and that's Bill Murray. So he has a new film coming out called The Friend. So in our next episode, we'll cover The Friend and then also cover our six most important Bill Murray movies to us. So that's coming up in 2 weeks. I'm excited about that one. I love Bill for a long time, and I think a fascinating career he's had in terms of different things that he's done. That'll be really fun to talk about him with you.
Yeah, agreed. He's definitely your one of your top guys. So it'll be fun to talk about him. But with that, we hope you enjoyed this discussion and this episode today. As always, be sure to let us know in the comments if there are movies that you thought of for De Niro or reactions to what we shared in our top picks or even Alto Knights in this episode. We are available here on YouTube, but also all the top podcasting platforms. Please don't forget to rate and review because all of that really helps new listeners and viewers find us. So, yeah, until next time, I should say, see you soon.
See you, Karan.